All right, go ahead, Nick.
Ready to go? Hey, everybody. Good morning. Cheer. We just did a coffee show before we get on. So if anyone wants to just, let me see those coffee mugs. What we got? I got a little bird on mine that a kid drew. Thanks so much, Aaron, the city of Portland, for having us on today to talk about this. I'm really excited about sharing the work we were doing with you all. And I'm just going to dive right in. And hopefully you can see that. Troy or Aaron, let's give a thumbs up. Make sure we're good. Okay. Today we're talking about some collaborative work we are doing called Bird Safe Maine. This is a collaborative project that we have been doing now for 3 years at least in southern Maine and around the state. It's a group organization shared by Maine Audubon, my organization, Portland Society for Architecture, the PSA right there using their outdated logo. I apologize, Addy. USM, University of Southern Maine, and Avian Haven, the rehabilitating wildlife rehabilitator organization. And what does Bird Safe Maine do? Well, we focus on this right here. This is a tough slide to start your Friday morning on, but what we're talking about is birds that collide with windows. Birds that collide with glass. This, believe it or not, is a major problem facing bird populations around the world, around the country, around the state. It's an issue that there's a lot of science emerging on just now, and that Bird Safe Maine has been studying in Portland and around the state for the past few years to understand the extent of the problem in the city and hopefully do something about it. So that's what we're talking about today. And I will start with sort of some basics here. There are tons of birds flying around the state all the time. Birds are particularly numerous in spring and fall migration. This is a map just giving some very basic numbers, but huge numbers about migrating birds. We are in the winter right now. Birds that eat insects can't stay here because there's not a lot of insects around. And so during the spring and fall, and we're talking particularly sort of April, May, and then September, October, billions of birds move between breeding grounds in Maine, Canada, the US, and wintering grounds in the South. And we're talking huge numbers of birds here, right? So in the springtime, at least 3.5 billion individual birds fly north from Central America, South America, the southern US, coming into Maine and Canada and the greening, warming parts of the northern part of North America. This happens all around the world, of course, too. As the habitat improves, as their nesting areas open up, as food, insects mostly, becomes available on the landscape, these billions of birds come up to take advantage. They come up in the spring to lay their eggs. So they pair up, they find nesting sites, they lay eggs, they raise the babies. There's tons of caterpillars, tons of insects to feed the babies with in the spring and summer. They raise those chicks until they are able to fly and take care of themselves. Then before the winter comes, they get the heck out of here before it gets too cold. And so in the spring, you have 3.5 billion birds coming into the US. At least 2.5 billion of those come up, into Canada. Some stay in the middle part of the country. In the fall, all those birds leave. There are more birds in the fall than in the spring because you have all these babies, all these new birds on the landscape. And so across the seasons, there's this huge biomass of birds that are moving north and south. If you think about what the United States used to look like 500, 100 years ago, we live in a very different place now, right? Before human civilization settlement in the US, these birds would be flying over virgin forest the whole way. Darkness below them, they use the stars to navigate. They mostly all fly at night. They go south, they go north. The landscape today looks much different. They are flying over an extensively developed area. And they encounter a lot of threats along the way. Yeah. This is a slide from the US Fish and Wildlife Service, giving estimates for human-caused mortality in birds around the country. You can see at the bottom there that cats are projected to be the largest predator of birds around the country. Please, folks, keep your cats inside. Another one that is sort of, in pop culture as a big threat to birds is land-based wind turbines. They're estimated to kill about 140,000 to 327,000 birds a year. But you see up at the top, building glass collisions kill exponentially more times more birds than land-based turbines or really many other things. About between 365 million and about 1 billion birds per year are projected to die after striking building glass. So what we're talking about is on the low estimate here, 1 million birds per day in the United States are dying after colliding with windows. And on the higher estimate, 3 million birds per day. So this is a major factor in bird mortality. How does it work? Well, it's quite simple. If you've ever accidentally walked into a sliding glass door, you know that glass is tricky, right? Glass is hard to understand, and that's even for humans. Let alone a bird. Glass can be dangerous to birds for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it is reflective, right? So glass reflects the sky that birds are trying to fly through. It's as simple as that. It tricks them to thinking that they're flying through the sky and they collide with the glass. Perhaps even more common is that it reflects habitat that birds are trying to fly to. So as birds are moving across the landscape, trying to find safety, trying to find food, they think they are flying into some vegetation, but they're flying into a glass window. It's really as simple as that. The second way that glass is dangerous is that it's also transparent, of course, right? Glass can be invisible. I was introduced to this bird collision work when I lived in Washington, D.C. And this, what we did then and what we do now, I'll talk about in Portland, is during spring and fall migration, we would walk specific routes through the city to try to find birds that had collided with windows to get a sense of what buildings were causing the problems, what species were hitting, things like that. This building was one of the most dangerous in the city. This is the Thurgood Marshall Federal Judiciary Building. This is right near Union Station in D.C., if you're familiar with the city. And this building has this interesting architectural feature. It's sort of two buildings connected by this big glass atrium. You can see here, you can sort of see, but this is obviously very reflective during certain parts of the day. And then at night, it is lit up from within, and there's a bunch of these tree things here, which, that glass is invisible, right? So if you're a bird flying across DC, you are looking for a place to land, perhaps you see these trees right in front of you and you don't see the glass. So we would often find, tens of birds dead or injured on the streets. So Maine Audubon and others, our partners, and sort of the growing body of science around the country is working to understand this problem. And what that has meant for Bird Safe Maine is understanding the problem in Portland and around the state. So what we've done for the past couple of years during spring and fall migration is gotten some volunteers who God bless them, don't mind getting up very early in the morning before Coffee and Climate, even way before we'd be done by now, to walk around the city, walk prescribed routes to figure out, is this also a problem in Portland? Are birds striking against buildings in Portland? Yes or no? And as the science may indicate, are birds striking more often against buildings that we suspect to be more dangerous than buildings that pose less of a threat? And what that means, what the science shows, is that the largest predictor for the threat of a building is how much glass is on the facade. Simple as that. So we started this in the fall of 2020. And we started walking routes around the city. And here is, we've modified this map a little bit. But what we have, we sort of picked a slightly random route. What we wanted to do is go by buildings that had lots of glass and buildings that had less glass. Portland, and I don't want to, Addy is much more fluent in this than I am, but Portland's an interesting city with some older architecture, characterized by lots of bricks, small windows. These are buildings that we, in the scheme of things, are not seen as traditionally as much of a threat. And so we wanted to walk by some of those buildings to see if we found birds there. Then we wanted to walk by some, say, newer buildings that had more glass on the facade. And so this is, although we sort of modified this a little bit over the different seasons, this is the general route, starting down at the Ocean Gateway building, walking up and around Middle Street, up to Congress Street, and then down back to Commercial and Wharf Street down here. And guess what? We found a lot of birds. So we are 5 seasons into our project, and we can say undoubtedly that we've confirmed in Portland what we suspected. Birds are striking against windows in the city of Portland, and they are striking more often against buildings with more glass. Simple as that. It's a tough business doing this. We are a compassionate group of bird lovers, and we find a lot of dead birds. It can be challenging. There's a lot of science, and perhaps our fellow Cady, who's done a lot of research into this, about which birds strike more often and sort of what characterizes those birds that we could talk about later if you'd like. But here are a sample of some of the birds we find. That's a savanna sparrow on the top left, a Swainson's thrush in the hands there, a yellow-billed cuckoo down the left. That's a fairly rare bird in Maine, and a white-throated sparrow on its back on the bottom there. We find just about as many birds stunned as we do dead. Birds don't necessarily, some of them die right away. Some of them are injured. And so not all birds die right away. The prognosis for how a bird does after it has an injury that causes it to sort of sit out in the open on the street like this is, it's not great in terms of their survivability, but we do find birds on the top left. That's a hermit thrush, a gray catbird in the top, a common yellowthroat in the hand there, and an ovenbird down in the bottom. You can see that ovenbird has an injured eye as a result of the collision. We have a great set of volunteers, and I want to thank, I know I saw Wendy on there, maybe others of our volunteers. Here are 2 of our super volunteers, the Kallenberg kids, who love to come out and help us find birds. So it's been a great project. 9:16. Addy, do you want me to turn it to you for the rest, or do you want me to continue?
Sure. Thank you so much. So one piece that brought Portland Society for Architecture to Maine Audubon is that we actually hosted a design competition 4 years ago. And the winning entry, I can actually switch. Maybe I won't, it's okay. The winning entry proposed a bird corridor on Forest Avenue with plantings and this idea to bring in new habitat for migrating birds and communities. And so I reached out to Maine Audubon to think about concurrent programming, and they were just starting. Nick had just started this process. And so we sort of merged curiosities, if you will, to really think about what goes on in the design and building community around this topic. It's very new in the state of Maine, but it's been going on for about 20 years. Some of the leading architects out of New York City were actually prompted by New York City Audubon in developing their visitor center with Bird Safe glass. And so the question now is, what are the products? What can designers do? This is the perspective of PSA. What are samples of really thinking about that reflective quality, but also maintaining a design integrity, and also creating the emotion of that inside out. There's a lot of research on biophilic design and natural light. The last thing we want, especially in office buildings and apartments, is to deprive humans from connections to natural light. So when we speak about building bird safe, we're not talking about eliminating all windows. But when you look at the award-winning residential cliff houses in the state of Maine, you're seeing a lot of glass. A lot of our waterfront development in Portland is a lot of glass to market on its location. Again, that connectivity to the harbor. And so these are some samples of very clever, creative projects in New York City. But if we go on, actually, Nick, can you move that? Yeah, so Nick had shown the Jacob Javits Center in the earlier slide when he was talking about the first image of reflectivity, and here it is. This is an IMPay building in New York City. It's a convention center. It's 3.5 blocks of glass. And they were actually doing an energy audit, and they were replacing their glass for energy purposes. And in the specs, they put in fritted glass, which if you go to that next image is what the fritted glass is, which actually eliminates, it increases the R value of the windows quite a bit, but it also follows the grid pattern of what should be developed that again impedes the bird's need to have that reflection. So it actually creates a barrier, but then the human eye can actually filter that out and kind of create almost this glass clear open experience. It allows for light in, and your mind takes out the dots. These dots on the left are heavily prevalent because it's a close-up, but if you look to the right, that's what you see. And it's pretty extraordinary. Like if you want to go into the next. So when we talk about products, right now, we're talking about glass. There are 3 permanent possibilities. One is acid etching, one is fritted ceramic discs, and the other is a UV filter. These are products that are embedded in the glass itself, in the glass making. And so the acid etch is external and literally stenciled in with a series of patterns. The UV filter, which I'll talk about last, is again a filter just like any other filter embedded in the glass panels. And then the cement frits that are these tiny little discs that are on the grid of 2 inches by 2 inches, which is the critical dimension for bird visualization. And you can have any pattern, again, as long as you follow that 2 by 2 grid. We work with Christine Shepard at the American Bird Conservancy and the architect Dan Pizelli out of New York City, who was the lead architect for the Javits Center, and sort of talking about what other products are out there. In post build out, the products that were used at LL Bean is feather friendly. And there are a few other products that you can apply almost as a screen. And so here's the feather friendly. These are the dots. They actually mimic the fritted dots, but it's in an external screen. And the intent really is to get the design and building community to start speccing the work in more permanent glass. But it's a new technology, and I'm completely compassionate to that. Having builders use new technologies is always terrifying, and there will always be hiccups, again, introducing something new. And so many contractors have heard horror stories about supply chain or mishaps, construction mishaps, et cetera. And we're trying to collect those stories and actually create a database so people can see the pros, the cons, the hiccups, but also track what's the exponential growth in the products being available and less of a headache over time. So the more projects that do this, the more successful outcomes. And then, working again with Cady, collecting this data, as she's done an exquisite job on collecting all the collision data and the species and the seasonality of what's hitting and when. PSA has her collecting data on projects in Maine, full build out, pros and cons, costs, hiccups, design issues, et cetera. And so this is where we're hoping to go with that. So we have a publicly accessible database that people will be able to see. One of the products, the UV, is something that we're moving away from as a recommendation for a few reasons. One, it's exponentially expensive. So it will just rock the budget and the bottom line, and everyone sort of runs to the hills because of that. The other piece is in a foggy coastal community, UV doesn't always work. I mean, you need the perfect conditions for it to work. And, again, Maine and its climate, and the reason you want a lot of glass is not actually going to afford the safety that you're looking for. So many people choose this because there's no visual marring that you don't see. So it just looks like regular glass to a human, but to a bird, there's a pattern and it definitely holds back, but it doesn't always work. And again, that cost-effective piece is something to look at and to be critical of. What is the next slide? Let's see.
I just have a couple other examples of some buildings. And I
Okay.
should just
So
to quickly explain the UV thing. Sorry to interrupt, but so the birds can see light in the ultraviolet spectrum where humans can't. And so the idea behind UV glass is to layer ultraviolet material strips, what have you, inside the glass itself. And so what you result in is a window that birds can see as a solid structure. Humans don't see anything. So that's what that is.
And the last few images are really designers thinking about screens, brise soleils, treatments that actually prohibit any reflective quality for a bird, but also allow light in. And this can be very clever. It could be absolutely stunning. And then this is, I believe this is an acid etch for its film. And again, this cuts out, but here's another screening technique. Again, if you have an interior image of this building, you'll see that a ton of natural light comes in. One of my favorite examples to give is the Museum of African American History that was designed by David Addy in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian. I noticed there are a few landscape architects on this call today. I saw Amy Majida and Stephen Mansfield. The one thing PSA really wants to start diving deep into, because there's very little research, is the role of landscape architects designing native habitats and increasing that palette of native materials, but also thinking again about its adjacency and the reflective quality. And if there's ways to account for height, massings, and distance from buildings. There's only one article out there that our partner Chris Marr had shared with me. So there's very little research out there, except one can assume that it definitely adds to it. But thinking about the flight height, there are beautiful drawings from the equivalent of the American Bird Conservancy in Toronto, so the Canadian Bird Conservancy. They've drawn out some vegetative studies, which would be great to apply and check out. But there really needs to be some more research on that. So we, Nick and I applied for a GP-COG fellow to work on Bird Safe full-time. And Cady has been our extraordinary fellow. We couldn't have, we just feel really lucky that Cady is on board. And I would love to pass this over to Cady to talk about the work that she's been doing and the resources that will be available to everyone in the community, you know, builders, designers, but also homeowners as well.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction, Addy. Yeah, it's been a complete pleasure to be working on this project. It's combining a lot of things that I've known and have a passion for with a whole other world that I get to learn so much about with architecture. And I've been doing a lot of work on the science side of things, which Addy mentioned originally, going through that data from fall 2020 all the way to fall 2022, looking through all of the photos from the wonderful volunteers and making sure not only that the identifications were correct, but also what the characteristics were of the birds that were striking, so we could maybe understand a little bit more about why those collisions were happening. So I'll very briefly say that we are seeing an increasing trend in Portland. It's a little bit soon to say in terms of the science, but we did see we did find more than double the collisions from last fall, this fall, with more than 50% more species. And so we're just learning a lot about what that looks like, and we're hoping to find some more volunteers for this spring. With that science, we've done a lot of really good outreach. I've worked with a couple different organizations, including most recently and excitingly, Bowdoin College, who has been very open and willing to do a full assessment of their campus, the risks that it holds, and kind of talk with us about where they're going in the future in terms of building development and guidelines. So that's some of the work that we do, as well as working with different facilities managers, architectural firms that are in the process of design or have already made a design and are looking for post-build solutions. And we kind of work across the board with trying to figure out what the best fit is for their particular project. So that's been a good amount of the outreach. But some of that outreach recently has been working with the wonderful Kim Schuler, the graphic designer of Portland Society for Architecture, in developing what we're making as one-pagers that we can pass along to different audiences, one being homeowners, because we do still find that the majority of collisions are happening at single-family homes simply because there are so many more single-family homes than there are corporate or commercial buildings. So we want to do that outreach to homeowners, but we've also made one-pagers for facilities managers as well as architectures. And I believe that we have attached those, and we'll be sending those out with the group. Addy, I don't know if you wanted me to link those today or if we're happy putting those in the resources. Perfect. This is an example of one of the one-pagers we developed. This is targeted towards facilities managers, and we've included some main particular projects. So the first one you see is painted glass that happened through a curriculum project at Yarmouth Elementary. So we had a curriculum project with one of our members working with fourth grade students, and at the end of the curriculum, they painted their own windows. So we wanted to make sure that that was included in our one-pagers, making them very targeted towards our personal community. And I've also been doing work with education with Mecca. They have a really fun class that they've done for the last few years, basically designing some bird safe solutions. In the past, it's been a little bit less realistic, but in a fun way. They had students designing helmets for birds, which was silly and fun and cool to explore, but we were hoping that this year we could bring someone into the class who has some understanding of how bird safe solutions work and discuss with them some of these solutions that we're passing along to other people, and see if we can get some actual ideas out of these wonderful architectural and design and art students. So that is currently in the works, and yeah, lots of things happening, but definitely pay attention. We're hoping to be developing a website that I'm working on, detailing all of the projects that have happened in Maine, just so that we can get a couple more data points on the board for Maine in particular, because it is such a new field of study. So,
you know, the Bird Safe Maine is developing a website that will have a ton of data, and in that will be what's called a story maps. So utilizing GIS to identify projects to date that could be added onto any bird safe measure, whether it's a decal that's applied after or embedded in the design process, but also sort of these spot locations of inventories and analysis. I think the Bowdoin College project is actually going to be really extraordinary. Cady will be presenting on that work coming up. And I think it's really smart to look and to share information. I mean, particularly with facilities managers and stewards of institutions. You know, when we were talking to Bowdoin, I made the suggestion that facilities managers talk to one another, because there are a lot of horror stories out there, but the more you can share and not be afraid of this, the better off it is in convincing really the powers that be that make the decisions to think about change. So that's quite a topic.
May I ask, please, will those flyers be available to homeowners? Can we get those flyers and send them out in our neighborhood?
yes, the team who will be sending out resources will be including those.
Yeah, we'll send a follow-up email with all the resources that were mentioned during today's presentation, and which will include those one-pagers that Cady sent over this morning. So yeah, we'll send those all out later today to everyone who registered.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nick and Addy and Cady, for so much great information. I definitely want to make sure that we get to all of the questions that I know are coming in. So we'll go ahead and start going through some of these questions, but I see Alethia's hand up.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Assistant Director for Sustainability at the University of New England. And I just wanted to share and offer that we had a pretty major bird safe glass installation about 5 years ago on the Rippich Commons on the Biddeford campus. So it's a 60,000-ish square foot building that sits right on the river facing the Saco River. And we use the Ornolux, the UV bird safe glass in that on all of the glass facing the river. And it's been very effective. We don't have an issue with fog here. So we haven't run into that problem. But Noah Perlett is one of our faculty members in the environmental science program, and they have been taking data on our Biddeford campus for years on bird collisions, and have found that the Commons has been that bird safe glass has been very effective there. But I'd be happy to share any information or connect you. So
We've been lauding that as the first bird safe project in the state, actually. So congratulations for having that. Yeah.
it was expensive though, you're right.
I know, I know, yeah, there's and I believe one of the panels actually broke in transit. So it delayed the installation. So these are the stories that sort of catch by telephone and create this fear and dread around the product. And so, but again, these are the stories we need to tell, and the circumstance and the context.
Right. Well, and I think, the longevity, I mean, the transit and the delays that happened for a moment in time, but this building will endure. And to my knowledge, it's been 100% effective. We have bird collisions on all of our other buildings throughout campus, and we haven't had any on that campus river facing.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So if you think about it from the perspective, it's been very effective.
Awesome.
And before we continue, I'd like to mention the other aspect that we hear from buildings that have bird collisions too is the sort of human element. People live in these buildings and hear birds colliding against them and dying, outside the windows. And so this is a sort of employee health and mindfulness issue as much as it is as a bird safety issue. We've heard that from a number of offices, companies that have reached out to us that have nothing to do with Audubon generally or birds, but they're like, our employees are, can't work when this happens. So,
and actually Nick had an intern last year from the University of Maine's law school that was looking at ordinances around the country. And I believe it was in Seattle, there was actually a health and wellness clause that they were looking at the bird safe going under, again, because it was for mental health and safety for the workers. So they were looking at that avenue as well. Amy.
Hi, Addy. Hi, everyone. So I'm the project manager for the Yard South redevelopment in South Portland. And one item that we're looking at for an alternative energy source are kind of smaller vertical wind turbines. They can be mounted on the ground, they can be mounted on top of buildings, the side of buildings. And I was told that because they're smaller and they move at a slower rate than kind of larger land-based turbines, birds can perceive that movement better and there's less risk of collision. I was just wondering if you had any data to confirm that.
What a great question. My understanding about bird turbine collisions, especially over land, is that it's primarily an issue less of them being hit on the way by than them not being able to see. I mean, they're not lit up, and they are just sort of structures in the landscape through which they're flying. And so, depending on the lighting or how the turbines are situated, I would imagine that sort of is the primary threat factor. But I'd be happy to talk to you or look at the plans or what research is out there about those. One thing we're finding in Portland and throughout the state and throughout the country really in this bird safe research is a lot of it is very site specific. So it's how are birds using that particular building face, or how are they moving in that real area? That plays a huge role in how many birds are present, what the threat risk is there. And so that may be an issue too, depending on where exactly you're building.
Yeah.
And
Thank
that is
you.
a great resource. I mean, there's an architect right now working with Nick on looking at all 4 sides of their building and their renovation. And it's really great to get that project in the early stages of the drawings to really work this out. She's very lucky, and the client is, 100% behind this, but she realizes going into this, again, how to partner at the earliest stages.
And what I think from a solutions standpoint is that the fact that you can narrow down faces or facades that are more threatening than others makes it easier to treat. So you don't necessarily need to do basement to ceiling. If you can figure out that this area is the biggest threat, this area may not be. So that's something that applies to sort of all buildings we're working with.
And one thing that wasn't touched on in the presentation, and Nick has been working with Saddleback, they're looking at a temporary measure during a nesting season, which is also something to consider too. It's very hard to enforce, but if you have a property steward that is willing to invest the time and to really think about, again, the migratory seasons or the nesting seasons and what that might be, there are really incredible alternatives as well.
Yeah, and overall, there are a million ways to build a bird safe building. There really are. We sort of have some of those examples. It doesn't need to be a big orange Nickelodeon looking screen building. It can be things very simple. The most effective treatment for a window, completely bird safe, is an insect screen. Things that we have on our windows all the time. That's the best possible solution. Anything that allows a bird to understand that there's a window there and not the reflecting, some vegetation or something, works. And that can be seasonal. That can be day night. It can be certain facades. It can be different things. There's a million ways to do it. But we are learning that it does make it much easier to consider this at the very beginning of a project rather than once you've built a giant glass building and now you're having strikes.
Yeah.
Troy.
Thank you. So I think you kind of answered my question, Nick. Cady had mentioned that, bird strikes at people's homes was kind of like a huge problem. And I was wondering what people who are concerned about that would be able to do, in a cost-effective way at their home. And it sounds like maybe the best thing they could do is put up insect screens. Is there a way to put those up that's more effective than otherwise, or like they need to be on the outside, or can they be the inside?
Outside.
So all solutions, pretty much, actually all solutions for birds colliding with glass need to be external. Otherwise, it doesn't break up the reflectivity. And sometimes actually when people do things like put internal screens up thinking that will be helpful, it actually does the opposite and creates almost a green screen effect where it cancels out any internal noise and will make reflectivity worse. So yeah, it has to be external. Again, the one pager will be passed along, and that actually has like on it listed things that homeowners can do and things that homeowners often think they can do, but actually doesn't really work.
Great. Thanks very much.
Sure.
And one quick note on sort of residential strikes. So there is a real difference seasonally between strikes in a city and in a lot of residential areas. That's primarily almost entirely due to the fact that there really aren't birds breeding in cities. But if you live out in the woods, say, or, I'm in suburban Cumberland here, I do have a lot more birds around in the summer than necessarily migration. So in the cities, this is primarily a migration problem. So April, May, September, October, as birds are moving, from north to south. If you live in the woods or live in lots of places in Maine, you will have birds around you in the summer and in the winter. And you may have strikes then too. So there's a real difference seasonally on this issue, depending on, what landscape you're talking about.
That would make an excellent graphic. Yes. Julie.
Hi, guys. It's great to see so many people here and what a great topic and presentation. So thank you all for being here. So, my question is, you have you've made an effort to do the research in Portland and walk around and make the case and look at the buildings and the birds and everything. And are you Do you have any plans to extend that? I know we talked at the very beginning about having South Portland, put this on our policy agenda, but I would need to make the case before that. And so I'm wondering if you have any plans to extend into, say, South Portland at all, because I'd be very interested in that. And then my second comment is, I know it's super early days, but like any thoughts or discussions about looking at, pairing like solar technologies with bird safe strategies.
So for the first question, we would love to expand into South Portland. The route walking we've done in Portland, it was really to demonstrate the fact that this is real, and it very much helps to say we have found all these birds. Here's a picture of everyone at these particular buildings. It's tough to deny. The major problem is really finding volunteer help. I mean, when we go out in the spring, people are out on the streets at 5:30 in the morning, which if anyone wants to volunteer, if anyone loves it, I'm looking at everyone. Feel free to. We would love to have you. So it can be a challenge to find people. We're out there every day for 2 months, and so let's talk. We would love to do that. We believe it's a problem in South Portland, like it is everywhere. But getting that data is really important to sort of talking to policymakers and things like that. For solar, I don't know if Addy. You've heard of anything like that. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go on.
I haven't heard of that combination. I don't think. Did you have like a design in mind that you're thinking of, something creative and cool? I mean, one of the things we talk about here is that there is really no end to the creativity.
Right.
Creative people are just getting started and sort of thinking about how to build buildings that are bird safe. I don't know of a particular sort of solar bird safe link right now, but that's I'm not the most creative architect, really. Yeah,
so that's, I mean, Nick said it, but like Julie's question prompts really the design community to come up with, what are new building technologies that can combine multiple needs? Again, there really isn't enough research. I mean, I love the project that was done in Biddeford by an architect that actually increased the R value in a private residence when they did an acid etch, but there isn't enough research yet around what that potentially could do just for glass. But then to embed some kind of solar screen with a battery pack and thinking again about something that's where like university prompts, the only school of architecture that actually is looking at bird safe, and this is why the industry is pretty delayed in picking this up, because there's nothing bubbling up from the core of the educational pedagogy. But UPenn just launched a bird competition for doing post build out and got very clever kind of decals and patterning, but didn't push it far enough. So maybe it's a prompt, and you start hosting design competitions to think about contemporary or temporary applications and then adding multiple pieces into it. So energy consumption, solar potential, reflective, etc. With the data that's been collected from Audubon and others, really knowing more now than has ever been known, what are the threats? And then what are, again, those applications? I mean, really, we're looking at Nick said that there are a million ways to build a bird safe building, which is true, but there are really only few products on the market. So you have to be very proactive and clever. And we're all waiting and looking and hoping to prompt and inspire. The Mecca art class is definitely out there and fun, but it's like, how do we bring it to something tangible to really think about product design and promoting that?
Yeah, Addy, that's exactly what I'm sort of talking about. Like, people find it hard to spend extra money for this thing or extra money for that. But if you can capitalize on the benefits of both and convince both industries to work together, it might innovate a fantastic, cost-effective,
absolutely,
We have seen some
I was gonna say killing two birds with one stone, but that is terrible. What's the different way to say that?
some buildings using Bird Safe it hand in hand with getting their LEED certification, because a lot of Bird Safe glass solutions are thicker than other glass. They have treatments, and so it's better for heat retention in a lot of places. I would say in terms of the solar farm, it would be more bird safe to have solar energy on a roof than to have perhaps a green roof.
Green roof, yeah.
We know that green roofs attract birds, and if you don't have bird-friendly treated glass, it's going to create more collisions. So that's one way that you could recommend solar energy over a green roof in terms of having a more energy efficient, environmentally friendly building.
Yeah, I mean, I was specifically, I know that there's been people trying to innovate films that you could put on windows that would gather and use the PV. And so I was more thinking about that, but that's a really good point. Thanks.
Steve.
I think Emily was before me.
Oh, sorry. It's hard to see who's there because you pop up differently.
No, I hear you.
Emily.
You're on mute, Emily.
You did.
Thank you. I lowered my hand, but I didn't unmute myself. I'm tuning in on behalf of the Portland Museum of Art because we are in like the very, very baby stages of creating our concept design for a renovation of the old Children's Museum, which is at 142 Free Street. And I think it would be a wonderful, I'd like to push for, I don't think I get any resistance, but I'd really like to advocate for an assessment very similar to what Bowdoin did. And I was wondering if you could do like a brief overview of the process or what that would involve so I can pitch it successfully.
Yeah, Emily, thank you so much for joining and for this issue. You know, we are excited about the addition to the art museum and are aware that you know, the potential for large glass areas in that part of the city could attract birds. So the assessment process would, it's a good question. There are a couple ways to do it. If you have designs out there already, we can sort of assess those. When it comes to sort of starting earlier than that, you know, a question of, are there birds flying nearby, something like that? It's difficult to do. And the answer is yes. I mean, there will be birds flying through the art museum area, as there are already. And so from that point, you can sort of feel certain that there are birds that fly through. It really sort of takes a first step, I think, of here's what we're planning or thinking about and what might be the impacts there or ways to mitigate those impacts. But I'd be happy, lots of us, you know, from this project would love to talk with you about, you know, how we might be able to mitigate any threats from the expansion, or, you know, how birds use the area, things like that.
Excellent,
also,
thank you.
One of our founding members is Austin Smith with Simon's Architects, and they've been very proactive with Bird Safe. And so Austin and also Julia Tate in their office. Julia has been involved in a lot of our discussions around Bird Safe and is keenly aware, and is also the architect on the project, working with Nick on really reviewing all sides and thinking again on behalf of her client, you know, what are the best treatments treating the cube and not just in a one wash. So really understanding that is great. But yeah, thank you for being on this. And we're very excited about the addition.
That's very nice.
Success.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this. It was perfect timing.
Great. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, so I'm like Addy mentioned earlier, I'm a local landscape architect here in Portland with Matthew Cunningham Landscape Design. And we do mostly pretty much 100% residential on coastal and woodland projects, which are very much in the residential world, the epicenter of bird collision potential with a lot of the architects we work with too, because they're very glass heavy buildings, modern structures. And it's kind of funny, since the I've noticed since the pandemic, there's been a huge boom, at least for a lot of the clients that I work with, for wanting to attract more birds to their house, because bird watching has increased. And us, it's, you know, we focus probably 95%, 90% on all native planting and biodiversity and everything, trying to get more wildlife, diversity and plant material, insects, whatever we want to do there. So it's, our main goal is kind of pulling these things closer to the house. And it's funny that there's never been there's only one documentation out there for landscape strategy to reduce bird collisions with buildings. I think that it is something that is thought about, at least when I'm doing my planting design in these areas, but there's no basis to pull from, like you said, to actually see. So it's just kind of trial and error, and then years and years of just waiting to see what happens. But I do see that, you know, seeing that architects are working with it. We never have these conversations with architects and vice versa. So the never-ending saga of the disconnect between architecture and landscape architecture plays once again. But it is something interesting, and if it would be great if you can send that.
I'll add it to the list.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that'd be
folks
great.
can, I mean, it's an academic paper, so just keep that in mind as you rummage through it. But yeah, it's the other piece too, Steve, the you know, the as Cady alluded to, the green roofs, and again, it depends on if it's intensive or extensive. You know, you have to define. One is deeper soil material with greater, more native plantings versus like a sedum, which would be less attractive. But courtyards are killers because again, how birds fly in is not necessarily how they fly out.
Yep.
And so you'll see, especially in residential design, you know, you'll have your glassed in courtyard and then this extraordinary bouquet of native plantings to attract, and then they're trapped in there. I think it would be interesting. It's so hard to ask a private client, but if you had a relationship with enough clients to keep track and talk to them and sort of run internally a tally of what they're hearing, thinking, and seeing, that might just be a good start. Again, you have to have, and I'm saying this because I know you, but you know, the relationship with the client sometimes ends or sometimes lasts, you know, and so you can follow through and see where that goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, courtyards and those corners, you know, anytime you have a glass corner and plantings inside, that will attract. And so they'll see from, you know, they can see through and actually see vegetation on the other side. That's a killer. And then also for more urban, it's the glass railings that are also a big issue. So if you have a roof deck and you have plantings and the glass, that is another point of conflict.
I gotta stay away from those glass railings anyway. I don't like them.
Thank you. Stephen, I just want to say thanks for your work, especially with native plants. It's really important. And one, you know, those things are not incompatible with a bird safe home at all. The difficulty sort of with this issue is that the majority of collisions are never identified by the homeowner. You know, they happen when you are sleeping or you're just not there. The majority of carcasses, you know, birds that die are not found. They're taken by scavengers or predators. In Portland, we have a fairly unique issue with gulls. You know, the gulls that we see patrolling the city, they sit on the buildings that cause the most strikes and are down within seconds from a bird striking and eat them up. It's really sort of unique in the homeowner context. That could be rats and other less desirable things. But you know, there are strategies to mitigate that risk off the bat. It could be as simple as sort of identifying the windows that are closest to the vegetation that may attract birds. But I did want to shout out to the American Bird Conservancy, abc.org, which is the leading sort of organization studying this problem around the country. They test all various products of windows and treatments and things to judge safety and establish safety standards. They are all doing all kinds of other research. And so they may have additional resources that may be helpful as you're encountering this project or this issue.
Yeah, definitely. I do. I live in South Portland, and I do know I have a lot of birds hit 2 specific windows at my house. And
There you go.
Haven't figured out why, because they're very different windows from each other and in different spots with different things outside of them. So I don't really know why, but it's just 2.
Well, that's good that at least it's know that those, and we hear that a lot from homeowners where it's, I got this one window and that causes the problem. And then often people do treat it and the problem goes away. So it works. Troy?
Yeah, or thanks again, Addy and Nick and Cady for this really interesting presentation. I just wanted to give a shout out for Councilor Zaro and the Sustainability and Transportation Committee. Last last session, the committee invited Audubon and Addy to present basically a similar presentation to the council committee, and they had asked staff to work on ordinance or policy in Portland to reduce bird strikes during migration. So last year we collaborated with stakeholders, builders, and architectures and design professionals for some data. Now we're currently working with city staff and the planning and inspections department on policy language. And so stay tuned if you want to stay involved in that conversation. It will be coming up for further discussion at the Sustainability and Transportation Committee this year. And so stay tuned for if you want to sign up for, we'll keep you posted on how that's going through Coffee and Climate newsletter. And you can stay tuned to updates from the Sustainability Office of when that conversation will happen. But we really appreciate the participation of all the stakeholders who have added contributions so far. And we look for more comment as it comes up in the committee later this year. So.
Yes. And I would like to add, actually, I wish the American Bird Conservancy was looking more at vegetation, but they're not. And so the more landscape architects can get involved and ask these questions, the better it is to encourage broader studies of this, whether it's through the Landscape Architecture Foundation or through ASLA. I think that this is a topic ripe that is not, ABC tests product and they have various methods, but they're not actually looking at that vegetation yet. And so again, I encourage more landscape architects to dive into this. So thank you, Steve. We'll get on you right away.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We want to be really respectful of time, and we see that it's 10 o'clock now. And I don't know if Nick or Addy, I don't know if you had anything last that you wanted to say.
Just want to thank everyone for having us here, Aaron and Troy and everyone and folks joining. My email is nlund@maineaudubon.org. I'm happy to answer questions from with the team here from anyone who has additional comments.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, it's exciting to see the interest. And there are great projects. There's the PMA, there's also the RU, and they're definitely working with us. There's a lot of build out in the city and people are becoming aware more and more so. So I'm actually more hopeful and also looking for more creative solutions. I think it will be really exciting to see.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And like I said, we're going to send a follow-up email and we'll include Nick's email in there and Addy if you're comfortable with that, and all of the resources that we mentioned today as well. So look out for that email and have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.